So we continue today with chapter 8. In chapter 7, we had this story of the Syrophoenician woman. This is the woman that came up to Jesus who had a daughter who was possessed, had an unclean spirit, and yet asked Jesus to help. And Jesus said that let the children be filled first. It's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. He's offering the salvation and all the healings and all of that first to the Jews. Give them a chance for the first try. And he calls her a dog. He kind of implies that she's a dog. Instead of her taking umbrage of that, she goes, "Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs." He marvels at this, and he says, "For this saying, go your way, and the devil is gone out of your daughter." And when she got home, the daughter had laid up upon the bed. So again, understanding the character of God and how your faith can work within the character of God, she understood it perfectly and was able to access faith. And we ended chapter 7 with the story of a mute man that was brought to him. He had an impediment of speech, and he couldn't hear. And they took him aside, and Jesus took him aside and put his fingers on his ears and spit and touched his tongue and said, "Be opened." And he opened his ears and opened his tongue. And the man could straightway talk and hear. He charged them that they tell no one. And again, this is one of those done in secret things that Jesus has done before. And we see that he does this because sometimes he does for faith reasons. He'll do something big that's demonstrative, and then he'll do small things. But the goal is faith. The goal is not all the fame that comes with the big things. But it's the little points of faith that are important. We see in chapter 7 that chapter 8, that in those days the multitudes were great. And we have the story of him again feeding thousands of people. The first one was the feeding of the 5,000. This is the feeding of the 4,000. He has people following him, and he recognizes they've been out there being taught for 3 days and have had nothing to eat. The disciple says, "From whence can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness?" And he said, "Well, how many loaves do you have?" 7. And he commanded the people to be set down. He did the exact same thing, set them down. And everyone had eaten, and there was about 4,000 people. And there were left 7 baskets this time. So they had 7 baskets full of food left over after thousands of people had eaten. And he went into a ship after this, and later on the Pharisees came to him, and they were tempting him. They wanted a sign. We're not going to believe you till you show us a sign. He does all these miracles. He's fulfilling all of these prophecies, and yet they're not going to believe until he jumps through their hoops. Well, he doesn't do that. So instead of jumping through their hoops, he tells them, "Why doth this generation seek after a sign? Verily, I'm not going to give any sign to this generation." Now, later on, he'll mention the sign of Jonah. But right now, he's not going to play their game. And when the disciples had forgotten to take bread, he says to the disciples, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees." He's speaking figuratively. The philosophy of the Pharisees, but they weren't catching it. And it's very hard for Jesus. He speaks in these eloquent terms. He thinks he's being clear, and people are scratching their head going, "Well, this is because we forgot bread." And he goes back, "Why reason you that this is because we forgot bread? Are your hearts so hardened?" Many times when Jesus in the Bible is clear about something, we will harden our hearts. We harden our hearts because of philosophy, of theology, of concordances, of our traditions. And those things will harden our hearts. Instead of hearing what Jesus or the Bible has to say, we'll hear what we have been told it says or what we think it says. You don't realize that many of the figurativisms need to be seen, but also it's a lot of precision in here. He is very precise at very times. And even in the figurativisms, a coin is a coin. A sheep is a sheep. A prodigal son is a prodigal son. You're very precise, even in the parts of the figurativisms. So here he goes, and he goes, "Well, you remember the first time, how many baskets did you give up? 12. And this time, how many baskets did you do?" He goes, 7. So don't you understand? This isn't about bread. If I wanted bread, I could have bread anytime I wanted. This is about you understanding not to pick up the leaven of the Pharisees. He goes up to Bethsaida after this, and there was a blind man that besought him. And he took him by the hand, and he touched his eyes. He put his hands off, he spit in his hands and says, "What do you see?" And he goes, "Well, I see men walking as trees." He did this again, and he restored his eyes clearly. Then Jesus said, "Neither go into the town, nor tell any in the town." So again, why does Jesus do these things? Because some things in faith are specific. Some things are to be more general. Some things will create more faith. Some things that Jesus did destroyed people's faith. When somebody that's verifiably blind, that's verifiably mute, some people will just harden their hearts even more because of that miracle. I mean, he raised Lazarus from the dead, and then within a week he himself was dead. So, it's a crazy thing. And then the disciples, as he was going through Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples the very important thing is like, who do men say that I am? And the response, well, some are John the Baptist. Some say you're Elijah. Well, who do you say that I am? And this is very poignant. This is the one that got me to do this whole thing anyway. Who do men say that I am? Who do you say? So he's going to ask all of that. Who do you say? Not just who does the theologian say? Or what do the concordance says? Or what does this person say or that? Who do you say? Your statement is important for your faith. And then, of course, Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he charged them that they would tell no man. He wasn't trying to hide. Faith doesn't come third party. Faith is first party. Faith is two people. Faith is you and Christ. Faith is not you plus somebody else. So he didn't want people to be influenced. We can be influenced by their words and by their testimony, but they don't tell us he's the Christ. He tells us he's the Christ. And the situation tells us he's the Christ. The words, of course, do, but we're not doing it just because Peter says so. We're agreeing with Peter, but we're also agreeing with the Word. So he does this, and he tells them that he's going to suffer, and he's going to be killed, and after 3 days he'll rise again. Once again, 3 days. We're dealing with 3 days. And so Peter was going to rebuke him, and this is the very famous, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So again, the Catholic Church tries to make Peter something here. First he's called, he changes his name to Rock, which is in another gospel. That doesn't happen here. But here he also does call him Satan. "Get thee behind me, Satan," in verse 33. "For your savor is not the things of God, but the things of men." And then he called the people unto them. Now this is interesting. He calls the people unto him with his disciples. He wants everyone to hear this next verse. "Whosoever shall come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it. And whoever shall lose his life for my sake, and for the gospel's." It has to be not just one, and for the gospel. The gospel is important. People want to have Jesus without the gospel, or they want the gospel without Jesus. You got to have both. "The same shall save it. But what will it profit man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul?" That's something I've thought about since I was a kid. What would it take, what would you give for your soul is what Jesus would ask. "Whoever shall be ashamed of me and any of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed of when he comes in the glory to his Father and the holy angels." So we see chapter 8 is very powerful. We're telling these stories, and we've got a lot of faith going on, but Jesus is also beginning to tell the truth about what's going to happen. Because we have the triumphal entry coming up soon. And then in the chapter in Mark, and we have it coming up, I think in chapter 11 here, and he goes and enters Jerusalem, and he starts teaching in 11 and 12 and 13. In 14, we start with the crucifixion through 15, resurrection, and 16. But to see all of this come together, to look at it from this gridwork view, not to take things as you've been told. Look into it for yourself. That's our privilege, and that's our joy, and that's what we should do. Thank you.